Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so let's get started here. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this customs compliance webinar hosted by Menzies LLP, featuring the Vartan consultancy and guests. The webinar is being recorded for information, so a copy will be available afterwards if required. I'm Sean Turner. I'm a VAT senior manager here at Menzies in London. There's lots to get through here. There's been lots of developments, continue to be lots of developments in the customs arena and wider. So without further ado, on the next slide, please, is our speakers for this morning, just to give you a heads up on those. But when I hand over to Miles in a few minutes, I'll let him introduce the speakers one by one at that point. Firstly, though, a little bit about Menzies. So on the next slide, please. If you don't know, Menzies LLP is a full-service accountancy and business advisory firm based in the south of England, specialising in advising SMEs and large corporates. We are sectorised so that we have an approach by industry focus, and the firm has a strong transport and logistics sector specialism. We advise across the UK and internationally as well, which I'll come on to in a second. But in terms of VAT, which is my specialism, the team here will deal with any kind of VAT advisory issue that comes across our desk. But me personally, I have a VAT and customs duty specialism. International movement of goods and international VAT is my thing. So that's us here at Menzies. And just to point out on the next slide, please, we're part of the HLB International Network. So we have global reach in up to about 157 countries worldwide. So if expanding out of the UK or from outside coming in, we can connect you with specialists in any of the countries where you're likely to be doing business. It's a very strong network, voted 8th network globally last year. So anything you need on that front, global specialism, global advisory, do come to us and HLB. We can put you in touch. So finally from me, before I hand over to Miles, on the next slide, please, what this webinar is all about, really, customs compliance. It's becoming more and more prevalent. Obviously, you're all aware after Brexit, things are ramped up. Businesses and importers had to deal with things they never had to deal with before. Administration, one thing, knowing the customs rules and regulations, it's been forever changing, continues to change. And that's what this morning is going to be about. So that's enough from me. I'll now hand over to Miles in just a second. Please put any questions you have in the chat box, and we'll come to those at the end of the Q&A section. But other than that, enjoy the speakers, and over to you, Miles. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We had a nice slide up before with pictures of who's talking, but I'll talk us around the table. So with me today, I've got Darryl Ripper, who is our consultant in the for Vartan consultancy, who specialises in customs compliance. I've got Kevin Gostick, who will take you through our Authorised Economic Operator programme, where over the years, having now helped over 12% of all successful applicants in terms of AEO, Kevin has got some great processes that he'll be able to explain to you. We've got Gabriel Rozenberg joining us a little bit later. Gabriel is going to tell us all the latest on CBAM. So customs compliance has become more prevalent, and Sean and I were talking earlier this morning that we don't know what Mr. Trump's going to do. So we all need to be on our toes and be agile in terms of being able to design solutions and being able to respond to our clients and being able to help them. As we've got a short period of time, we're going to crack on at some pace here. So next slide, please. Here are the subjects we're going to be touching on, starting with EU customs reform overview, what our neighbours are doing, and I'm going to be suggesting that really we should be trying to keep up with them. And we'll finish on Freeports. We've had quite a lot of activity here in the Eastern region, and as Vartan Consultancy, we're helping in a number of Freeports in terms of various applications with HMRC. Next slide, please. So the EU customs reform overview. The market we left have been working hard to try and make their systems more efficient and more really adaptable. They're bringing in a customs reform overview with a timeline suggesting that this is going to be kicking in 2028 for e-commerce companies, then 2032 for other businesses. You can see on the screen here, we talk about trusted traders. Of course, AEO, for those who know, was always regarded and is regarded as a trusted trader scheme. In the EU, you're going to be able to become a trust and check trader, which doesn't really run off the tongue very well, but a trust and check trader, which will enable you to import goods once you're approved with no active customs information. It gives you access to one data hub that is a 360-degree data hub, which gives customs an overview, 360-degree overview of the movements of all goods in their supply chains. But unlike AEO in the UK, which we still need HMRC and the government to market, but we're going to touch on that in a second. In the EU, there is a real movement now to having this single EU customs interface. It's all going to revolve largely around the data hub. And one of the key points will be that you only need to enter your information the once. So you're going to be able to enter into the EU customs data hub the same information to cover multiple consignments, which is going to save you time and money. And the most transparent and stable supply chain traders will be able to move through green lanes, not just in Holland, as currently there's a green lane system, but this will be across the whole of the EU. So it's a system which is going to enhance risk management and compliance efficiency. Next slide, please. And as I've touched on here, as you could probably imagine, AI is coming into customs speak these days. There are a couple of people on the call I know have got AI applications working in their office, and with employees and staff getting used to the fact that this is a way of their businesses being able to increase their capacity, and there isn't so much the worry that it's going to affect their jobs. The data-driven system for the EU are talking about is going to help with volume predictions and improve forecasting and optimize supply chain. And as we mentioned, e-commerce is going to be able to interact with the data hub in a very efficient way and giving all member states access to the same time real data and being able to pool information. Next slide, please. So we've touched on the benefit for trusted traders, and we've touched upon AEO. So that's the UK logo for AEO. Vartan Consultancy have been pleased to be involved in the modernising authorisation team and with HMRC. So we've been commenting on template information, which is going to be up sometime in the next couple of months up on the AEO page. There's also going to be beta testing through the modernising authorisation system. Yesterday, the group announced that there's going to be the ability for you to sign up for beta testing to relate to imported goods being temporarily arriving in the UK and also approved export status. We're going to send you the link to that because we've been asked to spread the word if at all possible. Next page, please. So as you can see here, as the UK, as the border target operating model was launched, it made reference, I think, on page something like 75 of 400 odd, that there are more than 45 trusted trader schemes in the UK, and these are going to be merged down to 5, with AEO being the headline act. Declarations and simplifications come a quick second, and that will, underneath that heading, you've got everything from fixed transport installations, EIDR, simplified declarations, registered exporter, even authorised banana weigher still featuring. You've got a section for ports and wharfs, fiscal and transit. So we've got those 5 main headings coming, which have reduced down from that large number. And all these, you can see those all coming off this wheel. And we couldn't fit them all on, but by having AEO and that one entry check and assessment from HMRC will mean any applications for any of those applications that you can see on the screen will just be a case of HMRC picking up the same data that you've submitted and has been assessed and dropping it into that application. All you'll have to do, as you do under AEO at the moment, is inform them of any significant changes to the business, change of directors, etc. Thank you. Next slide, please. So, Kevin, maybe you could take us through some of the benefits of AEO, and I know that you're then going to be taking us through some of the processes. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. I did have something to say about the previous page, but I think we can start here. So aside from these direct benefits to AEO, such as less inspections, priority treatment, there are some indirect benefits too. So AEO is a culture of continuous improvement and standardization. So AEO holders are encouraged to work with other AEO holders when choosing partners such as brokers, hauliers, third-party warehouses, so it can actually help you win new business too. Next slide, please, Corinne. So since its launch in 2009, when Miles helped the first of our customers achieve their ambitions of AEO status, we've adapted our process. And we've come up with a much simpler step-by-step way of achieving it now through considerable experience, including documentation templates and a real understanding of what HMRC want to hear from you in your answers. So Vartan can actually help you maintain your AEO status with compliance checks, like an MOT, if you like, to take the stress out of an approaching HMRC visit. Next slide, please, Corinne. So like nobody likes to show off, but Vartan have a 100% success rate in our AEO applications. We've done 12% of all of the applications in the UK, some 160 companies. Next slide, please, Corinne. So once you achieve AEO status, it's then your duty to maintain that status, to actually use it and not let the company slide back into its old routines, but use it to drive change in compliance standards, to keep your process updated, keep tracking issues until they're fully resolved. If you can maintain a really high standard, then AEO will hopefully help you become a better version of yourself. I think I'm handing over to you for the next slide, Miles.
Thank you, Kevin. That's very useful. So we've got a couple of questions coming in already. Please keep on putting them in. The Northern Ireland and UK internal market. I was brought up in Belfast. We moved there in 1969, just at the beginning of the Troubles. So I've got intimate experience and know what happened over there and why everything is so sensitive. But as you all know, it's effectively joins with the Republic of Ireland. You can drive across that border many times. You don't even know you're there. So it was always going to be an issue when we left the EU, and matters and policies develop as we speak. So in terms of, we're going to take you through a little bit of information about this, but in a very speedy way. And there are some references that we'll be able to supply you with information following the webinar. So next slide, please. And Darryl and I are going to have a little chat about this. So we've got UK internal market and we've got goods at risk. So Darryl, when you're sending goods from your factory in the UK, you're selling goods in your factory in the UK to a company that, for explanation's sake, we'll say is in Strabane in Northern Ireland. what do you need to do in terms of your customer in understanding whether or not the goods are at risk or not at risk?
Hi, Miles. Thanks for that. First of all, the exporter of the UK would have to register for the UKIMS process. To be authorised under the UKIMS process will enable them to declare the cargo not at risk. This would mean that the cargo won't be entering any market of the EU or travelling and moving down to the Republic of Ireland. The customer won't need to provide evidence of this from the UK seller point of view, but the importer would need to make sure that they have a contract and some documentation in process to ensure that they can show to the UK seller that the cargo would remain in Northern Ireland.
Okay, that's great. So in terms of being the carrier, can you mute? So in terms of being the carrier, then moving goods from the UK to Northern Ireland, in terms of becoming registered, what does that carrier need to do?
The carrier, once they've authorised, they can help the customers with the simplified methods of declarations. They can use the TSS system to be able to perform a minimised declaration for the movement of the cargo from the UK to Northern Ireland.
So if the goods then are moving to moving to Northern Ireland, and we know that they are going to go into the Republic, what are the discussions? Because this is going to relate to Incoterms as well, isn't it?
Indeed. First of all, obviously, the Incoterms are going to be very important for both the seller and the buyer. If the seller in the UK is declaring Incoterms DDP, the Republic of Ireland importer would be expected that the UK buyer would cover all customs formalities for exports out of the UK and also into Ireland. As the cargo would be declared at risk, the cargo would then be declared under the full entry process. So it'd be a complete export declaration required. So the minimalised simplified procedure under not at risk under UKIMS would not be applicable. The cargo would have to be checked to see if there's any duty payable, but you can't use the UK tariff. You would have to use the Northern Ireland to EU tariff and the EU import tariff, which would then be able to specify if the cargo that is imported into Republic of Ireland would be applicable to EU rate of duty.
Smashing, thank you. And of course, we've heard also, haven't we, from people that we are in contact with in Northern Ireland, that there's little evidence of regulatory checks carrying on in terms of checking that these procedures, the current procedures, are being adhered to. But like all potential customs interaction, we would encourage clients and traders to keep a good archive and a good sort of record of documentations and processes so that you can show that due diligence has been applied. Would that be?
Absolutely. We always recommend that cargo that is moving to the Northern Ireland state from the UK, that maybe the exporter of the UK puts a clause on their documentation to say that they are under the assumption and the jurisdiction that they've had an agreement with the buyer in the Northern Ireland state that the cargo is not going to be moved into the Republic of Ireland. That way, that if the the buyer in Northern Ireland does decide to move that cargo into the Republic of Ireland, the UK seller can then be sure that he's covered as much information and due diligence checks possible to ensure that that cargo hasn't moved without their knowledge.
Super, thank you. Right, so we have information that we can supply you in terms of links, in terms of registering on UKIMS, and sort of a data information sheet which we'll pass on to you. So you don't need to ask that. We'll send you everything following the webinar. So next slide, please. We're now going to move on to a similar brief explanation on NCTS 5. So Darryl, just briefly, for those listening and for those who don't know, if you could just summarize what the move to NCTS 5 involves and why it is happening.
Well, firstly, the NCTS system for phase 5 is to predominantly ensure that the paperwork is eliminated. So it goes onto electronic system where digital copies of the transit accompanying document can be presented to the border of exit, the office of discharge, and the office of arrival, for the cargoes to be moved under transit from the UK to Europe. This involves obviously the driver having a digital copy of the transit company document on his phone or a tablet or electronic device. It also has the electronic movement reference number on that. Additional features for NCTS 5 mean that now commodity codes are mandatory, where previously they were not mandatory on those. And one major improvement for the NCTS 5 system is that you're able to actually pre-lodge declarations and amend any declarations you've done for up to 30 days in advance of the cargo moving and the transit document being finalised to NCTS.
So the amendments are going to be very useful due to the fact that ferry bookings can change, or there can be strikes in Europe, or whatever. So it's that flexibility is very important, isn't it? In terms of key tips, so that for those sitting in offices having to raise transit documents and everything will go smoothly, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the amount of information you need to submit one of these declarations. And for quite a long time, we've got used to asking clients to fill in templates for customs clearance information, so the direct representatives have got accurate information. I think we're agreed, aren't we, for that? I think there's 72 fields that you're going to have to fill in for raising a transit document. So a template, similar template, would be useful for NCTS 5.
Absolutely, yes. There's as discussed, there is 72 fields now on a NCTS phase 5 declaration. Some of these fields are repetitive fields, such as the authorised holder of the guarantee, the holder of the NCTS procedure, along with information to do with the shipments, if they have regular shipments for customers on a regular basis. Obviously, there's the commodity information, and the transport route that the vehicle takes would obviously be similar for each shipment. Excuse me. So with that in mind, this a template for the fields that are required for the customer to provide information for the NCTS and transit document to be raised would be very helpful, not only for the customer to know what information they need to provide in advance, but also for the agent that's raising the transit document would then be able to be in a position to complete the information correctly and in a prompt manner.
Okay, that's brilliant. So in terms of authorised consignor and authorised consignee, authorisations that once you've got a customs status warehouse, it could be an ETSF or a customs warehouse, and you've got a authorisation, becoming a authorised consignor and consignee is going to give you advantages for your supply chain.
Absolutely. With authorised consignor and consignee, it saves delays at the border and the frontier for the export port that's the vehicle will be moving from. The transit document can be raised at the authorised point on the NCTS guarantee and application. So therefore, the vehicle can spend less time waiting at the border than they would do if you had to wait for the NCTS document to be authorised by the Border Force at the point of destination and the office of exit. So this would greatly improve the transit flow for the vehicle, save costs for the customers ultimately, and save the driver's waiting time.
Thanks, Darryl. We read in the press over the weekend about potential Russian intervention in terms of the internet and e-commerce and all this type of thing, things that could affect our economy. So NCTS 5, regardless of what the Russians got up to, could get interrupted. Service availability could get affected, and it could be off for some time. Yet you're still having to send out your vehicles with manual notes, in effect, manual generating. There's things that you must remember, doesn't there, in terms of when it comes back online? What do we need to do then?
Firstly, you have to keep records of when the business continuing procedure was applicable. So you have to record all data that you would have normally submitted through the NCTS system. So you would have to record all data for each transit document that you've raised, and you would then obviously be expected to resubmit that and provide information to the CCTO and the Office of Destination and Office of Discharge for the cargo and the transit documents that you have submitted for manual documents. It's important to note that if the cargo has been raised by an authorised consignor, it's important that they have the required authorisations by the CCATO department, which would involve having a stamp authorised by the department to ensure that the cargo has been sent out by an authorised consignee. The document raised by an authorised consignor, if it doesn't have the stamp, then HMRC will not accept it, and the transit document, which the driver would have to take 3 copies of that to the Office of Destination and the Office of Departure, would not be accepted without that stamp. So it's important to know that if you are an authorised consignor, that you have got the appropriate authorisations and the official stamp from that department.
Okay. And the design of that stamp is something that we'll be able to send people. There's a specific layout and information size that must be on the stamp, because it's effectively a customs authorised stamp, which is you are given permission to use, but it's got a very specific design, which we'll send you details of later. So I think we'll move on to the next slide and the next subject, please. So transition tips for authorised consignor and consignees, Darryl. I think we've probably touched on a lot of this already, but in terms of driver coordination, your driver, if you're an authorised consignor and you're raising transit documents, and you have authority to raise it from a certain loading point, which is not the loading point you're controlling, there's going to be ways in which you've got to make sure that that driver gets that transit note, isn't there?
Yes. Absolutely. For documents that are raised under the business continuity situation, there is a guarantee that is required to be raised from anyone that holds the NCTS authorization. This comprehensive guarantee is completed and sent off to the Office of Departure. They will obviously submit this over to the CCATO team, and with that, it comes an authorised signature. Now, that authorised signature would need to be on the paper copy of the TAD if the system is not operational, and Border Force will check those documents with the driver and to make sure that those signatures are on the certificate of guarantee. If it's not, then the authorisation of the transit will not be approved and the driver would get stuck at the border. Excuse me. The driver's obviously got to have the digital copies at the moment, which is going to be enforced on the 22nd of January. At the moment, they are accepting paper copies, but the driver doesn't need to take paper copies if it's all been stored electronically. But if he does take paper copies, that he would need a copy 1, copy 4, and copy 5 for each of the different offices of destination and departure for the vehicle to make sure he can transit effectively through all the boarding points.
Okay, thank you. So the key message, I think, from authorised consignor, which is a subject which, when customers ask to see us, or we go and have a meeting with them, often isn't a headline request, but quickly people realise that becoming an authorised consignor means that your transit notes, documents can be given to the driver, and there's no further verification required. So can get to the border and get on with their journey rather than having to queue up at places like Severton or Birmingham Airport for some time to get their documents verified. Okay, so next slide, please. We decided we'd put this in, this slide in about DEFRA and border updates at the latest CETA meeting where Border Force were due to come and see us. They decided for various reasons, I think part of it was related to the election, they weren't able to send any representatives. And we do know, we've had anecdotal information that routings into the UK are being potentially, possibly selected and being related to no checks arriving when they arrive in the UK. So there are some ports of entry where lots of checks are happening, some ports where there are no checks happening. And I think it's difficult. It's good if you can get your route right where your vehicle's not going to be stopped, but it should be standard across the country. And I think certainly the representative membership organisations like the Institute of Export and BEFA are making representations to government to get this standardisation sorted. We've talked about the border target operating model, but I think probably the topical subjects are security and safety declarations, which have now been delayed until the end of January 2025. And will or can be kicked down the road even further than that, we don't know. But certainly what tends to happen. So in terms of any DEFRA developments, Darryl, is there anything sort of specific that might be interesting to listeners?
Well, first and foremost, there was supposed to be identity checks and general authorizations required for various topical movements for the SBS cargo. Unfortunately, HMRC and DEFRA, with the change of government, I would imagine that it's caused delays to this, which are now not going to be applicable until summer 2025. One thing that they have put into place is for cargo that's being sent over to the UK under research and diagnostic samples, which are subject to general authorizations from February 2025. You would need a general authorization from APHA to be able to bring that into the UK. Research and diagnostic samples aren't subject to risk categorization under the border target operating model, but there are stringent checks and regulatory requirements that you need to follow to ensure that your product that you are shipping to the UK under the samples definition is adhered to and applicable.
Okay, thank you. But I suppose that we all need to remind ourselves that, of course, we talk about these years as if they tick on like a metronome, but 2025 is only weeks away. So please get used to understanding what is going to have to happen in terms of making a safety and security declaration. And it's got to be submitted to HMRC ahead of arrival at the port. And as sure as eggs are eggs, if you get it wrong, your vehicles are going to get delayed. So make yourself familiar, get ready, and get your processes written. And if we can be of any help, then please contact us. In terms of temporary storage authorizations, the most recent one that I'm aware of being an authorised consignee temporary storage facility, which seemed to be something that was pretty much rushed through to help clients and hauliers not have to worry about delays at borders. Doesn't appear to have taken off. To become an ACTS, you're going to need to spend quite a lot of money and replicate inspection facilities at ports. So that's quite an investment, and you can only keep the fresh produce in these facilities for up to 6 days anyway. But the temporary storage authorization that has been in since we left before the Union Custom Code came in and since we left the EU is still at 90 days. It went from 45 days to 90 days all that time ago. So it's still at 90 days. But remember, if anything's going to be held in temporary storage beyond 90 days, then you have a responsibility to tell Border Force about it. And that's a bit of an own goal if you're going to get inspected and you find out that this is you've got stuff that you haven't told them about, produce you haven't told them about, and you probably get stern telling off from Border Force. By having an ETSF, external temporary storage facility, then which is by nature away from the port of entry, those on the call will probably know that you can keep everything in there for 90 days. It has to be cleared and then dispatched from there. And you can also apply for, and this is now being reinstated, they're considering applications for this, clearance on wheels. But if you get clearance on wheels authorization, so where you don't have to unload the trailer to put it into your ETSF, and you get that authorization, so the trailer's arrived into your compound, then please make sure that the vehicle is arrived at your compound. The own goal there is you allow the vehicle to bypass your depot or your terminal, and Border Force come and want to know, see evidence that it was actually arrived there before you let it go. The economic case that you submit is all relates about not having to employ people to unload the trailer, etc. And we'll touch on temporary storage when we get to the Freeport section too. Next slide, please. So the last bit from us, I think, before we hit the CBAM section, is to do with HMRC compliance essentials. We could have filled lots of pages with bullet points on this, but we decided to pick these three because we've had recent examples of where these have been very important. But as COVID has cooled down now, although certainly in Felixstowe, people were queuing up yesterday for the latest vaccinations. HMRC officers are permitted to travel and come and visit clients. They have access to the MSS reports, and they will be looking for people which they can come and do their job, which effectively is checking on compliance. So Darryl, in terms of these points we've got on there, and briefly, because we need to get into CBAM, but in terms of guidance and in Incoterms, customs valuation and document retention, just give our listeners just a little bit of information on that, please. Thank you.
Of course. Incoterms, it's very important that everybody in the supply chain understands the Incoterms and the correct Incoterms being applied, along with the responsibilities and the risks that placed for both the importer and the exporter. There is recent developments that have been asked by several agents now in regards to an Incoterm called DDP Light. This Incoterm is where the exporter is going to perform the import customs entry at the arrival, so if the UK, for example, but they expect the UK importer to pay the VAT. Please rest assured that that Incoterm is not a valid Incoterm. There is no such thing as DDP Light. If shipments are being sent over from DDP, the exporter is required to be responsible for the import customs entry and the import payment VAT and any taxes due. This would then require them to be registered with an ORI number or a VAT number if applicable. If customers do want to look at the benefits of DDP Light, which doesn't exist, I would recommend that they switch over to an Incoterm called DAP. With regards to customs valuation, it's important that everybody does their due diligence checks on the values on commercial invoices. We have come across several examples where Chinese are implying to importers into the UK that they could issue invoices for a lower value, so they would have to pay less duty in the UK. I strongly recommend against this. If you're not sure that the valuations are quite correct or valid as an agent, do some Google research on the product, check your system to see if it's something you've imported before. More importantly, if you put the entry through without any checks and you get an FEC front-end credibility check error on your entry, it's important that you action that and check that the values are correct. The FEC error that comes through on CDS will automatically update to accepted within 10 minutes. So you don't have very long to ensure that that's correct and take relevant action to that, where in chief it would stay as held. With regards to documentation and retention, it's important that everybody keeps their relevant records for import and export customs entries for a period of 6 years. Not only do you just need a copy of the customs entry, you would need a copy of the instructions, the direct representation, any contracts you've got agreed, customs instructions, payment proof of commercial invoices, and any contracts that you've got arranged with carriers. And more importantly, for the exports, you have proof that the cargo has been exported. If you haven't got documents for customs exports, especially a proof of entry, and you've declared 0 rated VAT on your commercial invoice, HMRC would be expected you to reimburse them with the value of the VAT that you've claimed as 0 rated, because you can't prove that the shipment has been exported out of the UK. The various documents that you could have in place of an export entry, because if you use a fast parcel carrier that are under the MOU arrangement, which is Memorandum of Understanding, they don't produce a copy of a customs entry, so you would have to look at other means of proof that the cargo has left the UK. We can obviously send details of this later on.
Brilliant, thank you. When there's those who can remember the undervaluation scandal that happened 3 or 4 years ago and was centered around, largely, sadly, around Felixstowe, people using Chinese carriers coming into the UK and then goods being transshipped to sent to Europe. The head of Border Force came to Felixstowe, and we had a meeting with the Felixstowe Port Users Association, and she stressed to everybody there that due diligence was super important. And as Darryl has suggested there, please make sure that you have evidential documentation which shows that you have taken due diligence to check on your customers, if you have any doubt at all. Okay, thank you very much. So next slide, please. So those who have been keeping their wits about them will have heard about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And I believe we have Gabriel Rozenberg with us from CBAMBOO, who we've asked to come along. Hello, Gabriel, who we've asked to come along to take us through this subject. There's a certain amount of information published on the internet and is given to those who attend seminars. But I can assure you that Gabriel is probably further ahead than most of us on this. So Gabriel, over.
Thank you, Miles. Pleasure to be talking to you all today. So what's been asked of me is to try to sum up this in just a few minutes. It's a complicated subject, so I'll do my best. So just a couple of slides. This is an introduction on this page to CBAM. When we're talking about CBAM, we're talking about, typically speaking, the EU CBAM, because that has already come into effect. But increasingly, we will be talking about the UK CBAM as well. A CBAM is designed to prevent carbon leakage. Carbon leakage is the situation where companies buy from outside a region with a high carbon price because it's cheaper to circumvent a carbon price. And obviously, carbon leakage undermines the whole purpose of pricing carbon, so you have to have a system to prevent it. The system up until now in the EU has been a system of free allowances. That system will be phased out, and it will be replaced by the CBAM, which is a price at the border on the embedded carbon, that is to say the carbon that's been used in production, on a per ton basis. Okay. So goods coming from outside the EU will have to calculate their carbon emissions on a per ton basis, and then the importer has to take that data and use it to pay a per ton carbon price on the imports that will be set at an equivalent level to the carbon price that exists within the EU. That is the principle of CBAM. So what goods does it apply to? Iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, cement, hydrogen, and electricity. So commodity goods. And we're talking about basic goods and semi-finished goods. Essentially, there is a list of 749 CN codes to which CBAM applies. And by and large, complex goods are not on the list. So we are talking about, if you look at the pattern of imports into the EU, you're mainly talking about the steel industry, all kinds of basic steel, but also small steel parts like screws, nuts, bolts, etc., C parts. We are today in what is called the transitional period, right, in which quarterly reporting is mandatory. The transitional period is quite a useful system that the EU has come up with, in which importers are being gradually, their obligations to report are gradually being ratcheted up. So in the first stage of the transitional period, importers had to put together reports on their imports, but they didn't have to get supply chain data. We're now in the second stage of the transitional period where they have to put together reports that are based on supply chain data. So if you're in the UK exporting these sorts of goods to the EU, then you will start getting requested for information on those, on the carbon content of those goods. And then in 2026, we move to what's called the definitive period where taxes are payable. The system that is going to be paid is little rococo. It involves purchasing what are called CBAM certificates, which are priced in line with the ETS. And then also alongside that, it's the requirement to get verified data. So not just any data, it will have to be verified by an independent third-party verifier. That's again an obligation on the vendor, the supplier of goods. Reporting will move to an annual basis, but companies will have to keep track of this on a quarterly basis not to keep up with their CBAM purchasing. Now, the UK has decided that it will introduce a parallel system for CBAM. Now, with a lot of regulations, if we were to do exactly the same thing as Brussels, then you would sort of imagine that you could have a single regulatory area, but that isn't the case with CBAM. We can have the same kind of CBAM in the UK, but we will still have different carbon prices in the UK and the EU. We have split our carbon price from the EU. And so you will have a different set of adjustments to make. Nonetheless, the UK system is pretty similar. It applies to the same scope of goods with the exception of electricity. It has a rather more sensible de minimis. So the de minimis for the EU is 150 euros. That's in line with customs requirements, but it makes very little sense in the context of CBAM. And it's, I think, something that we could see gets revised in future versions of CBAM. The UK has gone with a de minimis of £50,000 over a 12-month period. To the annoyance of the steel industry, the UK system starts a year later than the EU system in terms of the tax element of it, 2027. So there are concerns about the potential dumping of high carbon steel, high emissions steel products in the UK during that intervening year. We'll see how that pans out. The first year you're going to report annually, and then from then on you're going to report quarterly, and this is all being overseen by HMRC. So on the next slide, I've just got a kind of visualization that can summarize the situation for you, and it is a strange cross-channel complexity here that we've got. EU already producers in, say, the UK have to account for the carbon emitted, and then from 2026 that data has to be verified, and then when they are sending to the EU already, they have to declare, the importers have to declare the emissions, and the tax will be paid in 2026. For the UK, it's the other way around. Producers have to account for the carbon emitted in the EU, and then the importers have to declare and pay tax. So wherever your company happens to be located, you will have at least 2 sets of obligations to consider, and maybe even 4 if you happen to have operations on both sides of the border. There are distinct roles for importers and exporters in each geography. So it's quite a lot to get your head around, but this is the reality, this is what's happening, so it is important to prepare. So the next slide, I've got a few thoughts on what businesses can do to prepare. I think the point to make is that you have to start taking this seriously from a calculation and reporting perspective. Don't expect that it can be left to your logistics providers. If you are the named importer of record, then CBAM applies to you. And if you are supplying goods into the EU that are on the list of CN codes, then you will be asked for data, and it will be increasingly essential for that data to be verified. Otherwise, you simply won't be able to sell. What sort of data are we talking about here? So essentially, it is about taking each of your products that are CBAM goods and calculating what are called direct and indirect emissions. That is to say, fuel and chemicals, and then in electricity. Some people have heard of scope 1, 2, and 3. That's often used in carbon accounting in the environment space. Those are not terms that are used in CBAM legislation. We're talking about direct and indirect emissions. Start now, start preparing. If you're caught up in the EU system, you probably already are at risk of being fined if you are not reporting CBAM, or at risk of losing your ability to sell into the EU if you're not creating CBAM data. This is a significant new compliance burden. And it's also important to say that for that minority of companies that deal in heavy goods, they have a significant tax burden ahead of them they need to start thinking about. I would say if you import more than 1,000 tons of goods a year, then you may be surprised at how substantial your tax payments are going to be if you're importing, that is, into the EU. And I expect that the same will be true if you're importing into the UK in due course. And all of these things are things that my company can help with. So I co-founded CBAMBOO almost 2 years ago now. We've been working exclusively to understand CBAM and develop systems to manage CBAM ever since. Our platform, called the CBAMBOO platform, allows you to link up to your entire supply chain, generate the required reports, model your tax exposure, create strategies to minimize costs, all backed by a team of experts that we have here in our London office. And we can guide you through the process and keep you compliant. For people who are, for companies that are simply exporting, that are not the importers of record, we actually have a free tier. So very happy to showcase that to you. And for importers into the EU, we then have a complete system to manage all of that data that is on our platform for your benefit. It massively streamlines the CBAM compliance process. Just go to cbamboo.com/demo and have a conversation with me or one of my colleagues. Be very happy to talk you through that. So thanks very much to Vartan for giving us this opportunity to talk to you today.
Gabriel, thank you. That's absolutely fabulous. And you've got Gabriel's link there, but also there's going to be a QR code at the end where you'll be able to get loads of information from us. And we'd be pleased to introduce you to Gabriel, who we intend to be developing a relationship with in the future. So thank you, Gabriel. Thank you. So Freeport updates, and there's all good stories. At the end of always tend to have an ending. You'll find that the Freeport concept is starting now to pick up a bit of pace. We've been involved on the Humber with a custom site application, which basically was the authorization which released the seed money into the Humber Freeport. We're now helping a couple of ports, one in South Wales and one on the South Coast, that are in 2 individual Freeports. And locally to us in Felixstowe, we've got Gateway 14 up at Stowmarket, where we've got 120 loading bay range, the range warehouse distribution centre, and 2 other factories which are being built. Now, the great thing about Freeport, if we can go to the next slide, please. We'll move on a little bit here. Sorry, forgot the next slide. So the government, the new government, have confirmed their support for Freeports, which the arrangements will go through to 2031. And it was almost like Rachel Reeve has read the benefits of a Freeport, because from April 2025, we all heard about the increase in national insurance, where the threshold in employee earnings at which national insurance applies will drop from £9,000 to £5,000, but the NI rate will increase from 13.8% to 15%. And in a Freeport, you get, if you have build a factory in a taxation site, so you have a taxation site and a customs site, taxation site, you get all the benefits, which include exemption national insurance payments. So if you're employing 120 people in a factory and you've got an exemption on national insurance until 2031, it's a definite attraction. You also can get research and development grants, rate relief, and numerous other benefits from setting up in the taxation site. The whole concept of Freeports was to help with levelling up, which the Conservative government started. In fact, it was a Rishi Sunak initiative to begin with. So it's not really, and you'll have trouble getting a relocation approved. So if you just want to gain from the benefits and pick up your factory and move it from one part of the country into a Freeport, that isn't going to be allowed. It's all about new business. So all the real benefits happen within a taxation site. You can go for a custom site, become an HMRC custom site operator. So either you as the Freeport business or your customers, the Freeport business, can apply to use custom site authorization. And where it's similar to ETSFs and customs warehousing, you benefit from a cash flow benefit from the fact that you're not going to have to pay duty until either you sell the goods into the UK, but you have the opportunity to look at duty inversion, so that if whatever is the lowest level of duty, either the combined raw materials you've used or the price that you would normally pay for your finished product going to UK, you will never be worse off. But you can process within a customs site. So those familiar with doing inward processing applications, you'll know that they're time limited and it normally relates to a volume. So within a Freeport, there's no time limit on a custom site authorization. And you very simply, when you're applying, you say, what do you want to do within that custom site? It was predicated, applications were predicated on successful AEO applications. So if you had AEO, that really helped. And if you didn't, then if you don't have AEO, then you end up filling a form which does relate to AEO. You can also apply to become a custom site operation up to 42 kilometers from inside the site. So, for instance, if you're in Basildon on the A13, you can apply to become a custom site, even though you're not physically within the Thames Freeport area, which starts just east of London Gateway and goes right down to Dagenham, to the Ford plant in Dagenham. So Kevin, my colleague, has been helping with a couple of these applications. And Kevin, you've found that your experience on AEOs and customs warehousing has really been helping.
We're absolutely sure. Yeah, without a doubt, Miles.
So it's still asking for the same experience and knowledge that you would, and documentation evidence that you would have to submit to HMRC officers. For those familiar with doing AEO, there's a central office and then you have an HMRC assessment officer. The two speak together. With Freeports, it's slightly difficult in that you have an engagement team who are very, very positive and helpful. And then you have the assessment officers, and they do not speak to each other and not allowed to speak to each other. So our job is to bridge that gap. Okay, I think that's me finished on that. Thank you. So very quickly, those are our key takeaways and recommendations, and we will be providing you with information relating to those headings, because I want to use the remaining time to, we've had a couple of questions submitted. And if Sean, if you're okay with this, I'll go straight into the first one. So Darryl, I think Neil Bird has asked about how do you define establishment?
Thanks for that. Thanks for the question, Neil. Right, establishment. It depends, obviously, first of all, if it's an individual or a company that you're referring to. If you're referring to an individual, that person has to be residing and have a permanent residence in the UK for at least 183 days a year. If it's a company, a limited partnership or a limited liability partnership and a limited company would be registered at Companies House. If the business is not incorporated in or registered in the UK, as long as they're established in the UK and they have a permanent place in the UK where they carry out their business activities, that would also refer to evidence of establishment. Other proof of evidence that you might require for this is obviously proof of residence, if or their usual residence if they don't have a permanent place for their working operations, a certificate of incorporation issued by Companies House, any details of business activities and where they're carried out, any details of staff that are employed and where they carry out their day-to-day work, and any physical premises owned or leased by the business, and also details of contracts, orders and invoices held by or issued by the business, and then the proof that the business has its own accounts would also put across any evidence that you could use to ensure that they're established importer.
Well, let's jump in on there on the VAT side, because agree with everything Darryl says there. The VAT establishment position talks about human and technical resource on a permanent basis. So staff, premises, as Darryl already said there, to both make and receive the supply of services. So the VAT definition, and that's governed by the EU law as well, is quite specific. And also HMRC do look at Companies House, as you've already mentioned there, Darryl, and a UK director is obviously a very good example of direction and control in the UK, so that will always help as well.
Thank you. So we had a question submitted before the webinar about SNS declarations, and we've had a question from Alex Goulden during the session. So Darryl, do you think you could address succinctly that before we run out of time?
Yep. Yes, of course. No problem at all. Someone's sorry about that. So in relation to the question is that a lot of people are being asked for safety and security declarations, and a lot of inquiries about the GB ORI number that doesn't work from shipping lines overseas, etc. And they have been advised to leave this blank. Under the criteria for an SNS ENS declaration for movements from the UK to the GB, the consignee information required is if they don't have a GB or an ORI number, then they have to provide their full name, address, town, zip code and country. If you have a GB ORI number from the consignor, then GB ORI number is sufficient and the name and address are optional. Likewise for the consignee, if the ORI number that's used on the consignee field is an EU number, then a full name, address, town, zip code and country would be required. And if the consignee is a GB ORI number, then you would just be able to provide that, and a name and address is optional. In relation to the carrier, all carriers that are doing any movements from EU to GB must have a GB ORI number. If they do not have any GB ORI number, they won't be able to complete a SNS ENS declaration. So it's responsible parties from the carrier's point of view is that they must get a GB ORI number, and they need to do that before January to ensure that they're able to submit any SNS declarations. This sort of ties on to another question that we've had come through where someone's asked regarding the responsibilities, I believe, of an ENS declaration. The ultimate responsibility and liability falls with the carriers. They are responsible to make sure that the SNS declarations are submitted and in force. Third parties can do this on the carrier's behalf. Again, if anybody that is submitting an SNS declaration for an ENS entry, they must also have a GB ORI number, and they can submit these on the behalf of a carrier, but they would need to have a written authorization to be able to do this.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time, and I'm going to hand you back to Sean in a second just to close us off. But thank you very much for joining the session. You see there's a QR code on the screen there, which please, whilst I'm just finishing off here, please scan. If not, there's a link to, and if you have any trouble, please contact Corinne at vartanconsultancy.com or any of the contacts on there, we'll get back to you. Your feedback matters, as it says there. We would like to thank Menzies for the opportunity to do this webinar. I think we'd like to plan more in the future, and thank you for your attention. If there's any other subjects you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. So Sean, back to you.
Thanks, Miles. Yeah, we've done just over the hour. Thanks to everyone who spoke. A huge amount of information there, lots to take in, some really good content. Hope it was useful. As Miles says, just to reiterate, any problems you have, questions you have, do follow up with the email addresses there. Contact Vartan's, Menzies here, and we'll put you in touch with the right people. But thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.